The auditorium was louder than usual that morning, filled with the kind of restless chatter that comes before a school event. Rows of students shifted in their seats, laughing, whispering, and calling out to friends across the room. The yearly talent showcase was always a big deal, but for most of them, it was just another chance to gossip, stare at the stage, and judge whoever walked up there. People enjoyed the show, but they enjoyed making fun of the performers just as much. Near the side entrance, a quiet girl stood alone, holding a thin stack of sheet music pressed against her chest. She had come early, long before the audience filled in, yet she still felt like she had arrived too late. Her breathing was slightly uneven, and no matter how many times she adjusted her grip, her hands kept shaking. She had rehearsed for weeks, early mornings, late nights, sometimes even during lunch breaks, but none of that practice calmed her nerves now. She kept her eyes low, hoping no one would notice her, but of course, they did. A group of students sitting close to the stage spotted her and nudged each other. One whispered something too quietly to hear, but the smirks that followed made the message obvious. Another student let out a small laugh, not loud enough for a teacher to scold, but just loud enough for her to hear. It felt like a tiny jab to her chest. She tried to focus on the stage instead. The curtain swayed slightly as people walked behind them, setting up microphones and adjusting the piano bench. She told herself she didn't care what the crowd thought, but a small heaviness settled in her stomach anyway. She wasn't used to standing in front of large groups. Most days she stayed at the back of classrooms, spoke only when needed, and tried not to attract attention. She didn't dress fancy, didn't have a large friend circle, and wasn't the type who seemed to fit anywhere easily. People didn't exactly dislike her, they simply looked past her. And when they did notice her, it was usually with that strange look, the one that said they didn't expect anything special from her. She swallowed hard and shifted her feet. The piano on the stage was older, but well kept, polished enough to reflect the overhead lights. She had played it many times after school, when the hall was empty and quiet. In those moments she felt safe. The notes came naturally then. The music felt like a world she understood, a world where no one whispered or judged, where she didn't have to worry about what anyone thought. But today wasn't quiet. Today wasn't empty. Today she wouldn't be playing for herself. A teacher walked by with a clipboard, checking names. When the girl's turn approached, the teacher looked up and gave her a quick, almost uninterested glance. "You're performing a piano piece, right?" the teacher asked. She nodded. "All right, you'll go up after the next two acts. Be ready." The teacher moved on quickly, as if expecting no issues, no surprises. Her heart thumped faster. She could feel noise from the crowd washing over her in waves. Someone from the audience called out to a friend, and a loud burst of laughter followed. It made her flinch. She wondered if she should smile, pretend she wasn't nervous, pretend she didn't notice the stares. But pretending wasn't something she was good at. The student on stage finished their act, a short comedy routine. The audience laughed louder than the jokes deserved, probably because the performer was popular, confident, the kind of person who could make people laugh just by standing there. When they bowed, the applause felt warm and genuine. The girl watched from the side, wishing she could borrow even a small piece of that confidence. The host walked onto the stage and began introducing the next performer. The crowd responded with mild interest. The girl took slow breaths, trying to steady herself. She lifted her sheet music again, though she didn't really need it. She had memorized every note. A couple of students in the third row looked her way again. One elbowed the other, pointing right at her. She quickly looked away, pretending she hadn't seen anything. But she had, and it stayed with her. The next performer stepped off the stage. That meant she was next. Her throat tightened. Her palms grew damp. Every unpleasant memory of being laughed at or underestimated floated to the surface. Times when she had been too quiet, too shy, too unsure of herself. But she reminded herself that she came here for a reason. She wanted to try. She wanted to show that she had something inside her worth hearing, even if she wasn't the kind of person people expected to shine. The host spoke her name. A flash of heat rushed through her body. The applause that followed was polite, but light, nothing compared to what others had received. Not that she expected anything different. She walked toward the center of the stage, her footsteps small and careful. The lights felt too bright, revealing every tiny movement she made. Her heartbeat thudded so loudly in her ears that she momentarily wondered if the microphones could pick it up. A few whispers rose again, then a small laugh. She didn't know who it came from, but it hit her instantly. She tried not to react, but her shoulders tightened. and her grip on the sheet music grew so tight that the edges curled. She reached the piano bench, set her sheet music down, and took her seat. Her legs felt stiff, almost locked. She took a moment to adjust the bench, trying to look natural. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Trembling slightly, she could sense hundreds of eyes on her. It was overwhelming, more intense than she imagined. She wished the lights were dimmer. She wished the people couldn't see her hands shaking. She wished she could be back in the quiet auditorium after school, where the only sound was her own music. Someone in the audience whispered again. Then another soft laugh slipped out from somewhere behind it. She felt her chest tighten, her breaths growing shallow. Her mind told her she was being foolish, that no one really cared enough to focus on her that deeply. But her heart didn't believe it. Her heart heard every whisper as if it had been spoken directly into her ear. She closed her eyes for half a second and tried to gather herself. But before she could even begin, her first note came out wrong. Her finger slipped slightly, producing a shaky, uneven sound that echoed through the hall. It wasn't a terrible mistake, but it was enough for someone in the audience to let out a quiet laugh. Enough for another whisper to follow. Her cheeks burned instantly. Her throat tightened. She felt a wave of embarrassment wash over her so fast it made her dizzy. The thought of playing even one more note suddenly felt impossible. She stared at the keys, breathing unevenly, her vision blurring just a bit at the edges. She could hear her heartbeat pounding again, louder this time. She didn't want to look at the audience. She didn't want to see the faces staring back at her, some amused, some bored, some waiting to see her mess up again. Her hands hovered over the keys. Frozen, for a moment, she thought about standing up and leaving. It seemed easier than continuing. She imagined walking off the stage, slipping out the side door, and pretending this day never happened. She imagined the relief she would feel once she was away from all those eyes. But then something else stirred inside her, a small memory, faint but steady. She thought about the quiet mornings at the piano, when the sunlight came through the windows and the music seemed to flow effortlessly. She remembered the afternoons when she played softly to comfort herself after difficult days. She remembered the evenings when she practiced not because she had to, but because playing made her feel like she had a voice. Even when she struggled to speak in real life, she remembered a gentle voice telling her not to give up. Her breathing steadied just a little. She placed her fingers on the keys again, though they still trembled. The audience waited, some impatiently, some curiously. She took a slow breath and prepared herself to try again. She sat there for a moment longer, letting the sound of the audience fade slightly in her mind. She tried to breathe slowly, telling herself she could still continue, that not everything was ruined just because the first note came out shaky. But even as she tried to gather courage, she could still hear a couple of students whispering, their voices low but sharp enough to sting. Her hands rested over the keys. They were cold. She wished they would warm up the way they usually did when she practiced alone, when each note felt like a small comfort instead of something she was terrified of getting wrong. The hall was still bright, too bright, as if the lights were pointed only at her. She felt exposed, like every tiny twitch of her fingers was being watched closely. She fought the urge to look up. She knew if she saw even one amused face, it would weaken her even more. She took another breath, held it, and then gently let her fingers press the keys again. This time the note was clearer, though still soft. She kept going, slowly at first, as if testing whether the audience would allow her to continue without laughing again. The beginning of the piece was simple, but her nerves made it feel complicated. Her heart pounded, and she could feel it in her fingertips. For a few seconds, the audience stayed mostly quiet. Maybe they were confused, or maybe they were waiting to see if she would mess up again. Either way, the stillness helped. She focused on the keys, letting the sound of the music build again. But her nerves were still too strong. Her fingers trembled, and the melody wavered in places. She pressed a wrong key, and the mistake echoed across the room. A small snicker rose from somewhere near the back. The mistake hit her hard, almost making her hands pull away from the piano entirely. Her chest tightened again, and she blinked quickly, trying not to let her eyes fill with tears. She couldn't cry, not here, not now. She reminded herself that she had played this piece perfectly dozens of times. She had practiced until her hands knew the notes by memory, until the rhythm felt like breathing. But nothing about this felt like breathing. It felt like drowning. She forced herself to keep going, her shoulders tense and her breath shallow. She played a few more measures, but the fear inside her made the music feel weak. She could tell the piece wasn't sounding the way it was meant to. Even she wouldn't have been impressed if she were the one listening. She wasn't sure how much more she could take. Her mind kept replaying the sound of those laughs behind her. She wondered if people were watching her face, waiting to see if she would break down. Her thoughts raced, each one louder than the last. Maybe they were right to laugh. Maybe she wasn't meant for this stage. Maybe she didn't belong here at all. The thought hurt. It hurt deeply. Her vision blurred for a second, and she shut her eyes tightly, trying to stop her emotions from spilling out. She could feel herself slipping into panic again, the kind of panic that made her fingers stiff and her thoughts messy. She pressed down on another note, but her hand was too tense, and the sound came out too strong, almost harsh. More whispers. She couldn't tell if the whispers were about her or something else, but her mind assumed the worst. She imagined the students exchanging glances, rolling their eyes, maybe even smiling at her mistakes. Her breathing grew faster again. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to run, to escape the stage, to hide anywhere that wasn't lit up by those bright lights and filled with those expectant eyes. She started to lift her hands off the keys, but then she froze. She remembered something small, but important. It was a memory of the first time she ever played the piano in front of someone else. She had been even younger then, unsure of herself, but curious about how the music felt under her fingertips. She remembered playing a few notes for someone she trusted, someone who smiled at her softly and told her she had a special touch, a gift worth holding onto. That memory came back to her now, clear and strong. It wasn't loud like the whispers or sharp like the laughter. It was warm, warm enough to remind her why she was here. She lowered her hands back to the keys. She closed her eyes, not out of fear this time, but to block out everything else. She let herself fall into the sound of her own breathing, slow, steady. She knew she might make mistakes. She knew people might still laugh, but she also knew she didn't want to leave this stage feeling like she hadn't even tried. She opened her eyes again and looked at the keys, really looked at them. She focused only on the piano, nothing more. Then she started once again, this time playing the opening of the piece more calmly. Her hands still trembled a little, but she pushed through it. The audience was quieter now. Maybe they were curious. Maybe they were giving her another chance. Or maybe they were simply waiting for the show to end. She didn't know and didn't want to think about it. She tried to let the music speak for her instead. The melody began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it was clearer, steadier. She could hear the emotional tone returning little by little, like a faint light pushing through the dark. Her posture straightened slightly. Her breathing smoothed out. She let her fingers loosen as they moved across the keys. Every second felt like slow progress, but progress nonetheless. A few people in the audience leaned forward, not out of mockery, but curiosity. She didn't know that, of course. Her eyes stayed on the keys, but something in the air shifted. The atmosphere felt less harsh, more neutral. It gave her a small, fragile sense of comfort. She kept playing. She reached a part of the piece that required a gentle touch, a soft rise and fall of notes that always felt like a quiet whisper of emotion. She played it with more care this time, letting her fingers glide rather than press. The hall felt a little softer. For the first time since she sat down, she didn't hear whispers or laughs. She only heard the piano. The sound of it began to calm her, just like it always did when she practiced alone. The music felt familiar again, like an old friend she thought she had lost in the noise. She kept going, finding her rhythm slowly. Her confidence wasn't fully back, but it was growing, bit by bit. She focused so deeply that she didn't notice the audience leaning in more, the way their attention was shifting. Her fingers moved carefully, but with more feeling now. She played through measures she had stumbled on earlier, smoothing out the rough edges. She made another small mistake, but this time she didn't freeze. She simply went on. The lights didn't feel as blinding anymore. The hall didn't feel as heavy. She began to feel her heartbeat slow, settling into a calmer pace. And just as she started to believe she could finish the piece without breaking apart again, something happened. As she reached a section she always connected with, emotionally the part she used to play when she needed comfort, a memory appeared unexpectedly. She remembered sitting at the piano late one evening, the house quiet around her, and feeling like the music was the only thing keeping her together. She remembered each note as if it had been stitched into her heart. That memory washed over her now, and it made her chest feel suddenly warm. Her fingers softened. Her movements grew smoother. The melody began to shift from shaky to steady, from hesitant to meaningful. The audience noticed the change, though she didn't see it. Their posture shifted. Their attention deepened. She played the section with more emotion than she had since stepping on stage. The notes flowed more freely, each one carrying a quiet honesty. She wasn't playing to impress them anymore. She was playing to find herself again. The hall grew even quieter. She was too deep in the music to realize it. But the moment was changing. Something inside her was opening up, not confidence exactly, but courage. She played another gentle phrase, then another, her fingers moving more naturally. For the first time since she sat down, she felt like herself again. She didn't know what the audience thought. She didn't know if they were still judging her. She didn't know if they would clap when she finished. But she knew one thing: she wasn't scared anymore. And that was enough for now. The next morning felt different for her. It was not louder or brighter, but there was something in the air she could not explain. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was the memory of what happened yesterday, when she had sat at the piano and played with all her heart, surprising everyone who thought she had nothing to offer. As she walked to school, she held her small bag close to her chest. Her steps were slow, thoughtful. She kept replaying the moment in her mind when the room went silent after she touched the keys. She did not feel proud or bold about it. Instead, she felt a quiet warmth, something gentle, like someone placing a soft blanket around her shoulders. When she walked into the classroom, the atmosphere shifted. A few students looked at her, then looked away quickly. They weren't laughing at her today. They weren't whispering the way they usually did. Some of them even looked confused, almost unsure about how to treat her now. She took her seat quietly and kept her eyes on her desk. She didn't want trouble. She didn't want attention. She only wanted a simple day. But she could feel her teacher's eyes on her, careful, measuring, almost like the teacher herself did not understand what had happened yesterday. The lesson began, but the girl's mind drifted. She could hear the teacher's voice, see the words written on the board, but her thoughts kept returning to the piano room, the wooden floor, the dust dancing in the sunlight, the way her fingers moved almost on their own. At break time, she quietly walked to the corner of the schoolyard and sat under the small tree, near the wall. It had always been her safe place. She liked it there because no one bothered her and the wind felt calming. But today someone approached her. A boy from her class, usually loud, usually teasing, stood in front of her. She braced herself, expecting a joke or a rude comment. But instead he asked, in a hesitant voice, "Was that really you playing yesterday?" She did not know what to say. She simply nodded. The boy looked amazed. "But it didn't look like you knew anything about music. You never talk. You never, act like someone who plays piano." She glanced down at her hands. I don't act in any special way. I just play when I feel something." Her voice was soft. It was amazing. The boy said honestly. Everyone said so after class. Even teacher looked shocked. He scratched his head awkwardly. "I didn't know you could do that." She did not know how to answer, so she simply gave a small smile. For her, music was not something she learned to impress people. It was something she learned because she had no other way to express what she carried inside. When words felt too heavy or when days felt too long, she played. Later that day, the teacher asked her to stay back after class. The girl felt her stomach tighten. Was she in trouble? Did she do something wrong? She held her breath as everyone else left the room. The teacher sat at her desk, fingers intertwined. "Can I ask you something?" she said gently. The girl nodded. Double quotes. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl looked at the window instead of the teacher's eyes. "At home. I just practiced every day." "Did someone teach you?" She shook her head. "No, I listened. I watched videos. I tried to copy the sounds I liked. Sometimes I made mistakes, but I kept trying." She spoke quietly, as if afraid her words might be too loud. The teacher leaned back, studying her. "Do you know you have a rare gift?" The girl blinked, unsure whether she believed that. "I'm serious," the teacher continued. "Not many children your age can play like that. You have something special, something natural." The girl shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble yesterday." "Trouble?" the teacher echoed softly. "You didn't cause any trouble at all. You opened everyone's eyes." She paused. "I know things have not been easy for you. I know how students treat you sometimes. But what you showed yesterday, it changed things." The girl didn't answer. She didn't know how. The teacher leaned forward. "I want you to consider joining the school music program. There's a small audition next week. I think you should try." The girl's eyes widened. "Me? But I've never. I don't perform for people." "You already did," the teacher said with a soft smile. "And you did beautifully." The girl felt her heartbeat quicken. The idea both excited and frightened her. When she left the classroom, she walked slowly, almost floating. She had never imagined someone would ask her to join something like that. No one ever expected anything from her before. People hardly noticed her, but now things were changing, and the change scared her. On her way home, she kept thinking about the audition. She imagined a bright room, strangers watching her, waiting for her to play. Her palms grew sweaty just imagining it. She passed by a small shop where music played softly from a speaker outside. She stopped, listening. A gentle piano melody filled the air, light and soothing. Without thinking, she closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Music always made sense to her. The world could be noisy, confusing, and full of things she didn't understand. But music was clear. Music was safe. When she reached home, she went straight to the small piano in the corner of the room. The keys were a little worn, a little chipped, but it was her most precious thing. It was the one place where she could breathe freely. She sat down and gently placed her fingers on the keys. At first she played slowly, one soft note at a time, letting her nerves settle. Then she let her hands move the way they always wanted to. A melody formed, gentle but strong, rising and falling like a story she did not know how to tell with words. Her mother, who was preparing food in the kitchen, stopped and listened. She leaned against the doorframe, watching her daughter play. There was a softness in her mother's eyes, a mix of admiration and longing. "You're thinking about the audition, aren't you?" her mother said quietly. The girl paused and looked up. "I don't know if I can do it." "You can," her mother said with certainty. "You just don't know it yet." The girl lowered her gaze back to the piano. "What if people laugh? What if I freeze?" Her mother walked closer and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "They won't laugh. They've already seen what you can do. And even if you freeze, you will still try. That is enough." The girl didn't respond, but her mother's words stayed in her heart. That night she lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The moonlight from the window cast a soft glow across her room. She could hear distant sounds from outside, cars passing, someone talking far away, but her mind was focused only on the audition. She imagined standing in front of judges, the silence, the weight of expectation. Her stomach twisted. But then she imagined placing her fingers on the keys. She imagined the first note, the second, the third. She imagined the moment the world around her faded, leaving only the music. Maybe she could do it. Maybe she was ready. She turned to her side and closed her eyes. The last thought that drifted through her mind before sleep finally came was simple. If she wanted her life to change, she had to be brave enough to try. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to try. She continued playing, letting the soft notes guide her forward as if they were leading her away from her fears. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the rows of students sitting in the audience. She forgot the whispers and the small laughs that had cut into her earlier. All she knew was the music flowing from her hands, the melody she had practiced so many times that it felt like a part of her. She didn't realize that the atmosphere in the room had changed. The whispers were gone. Even the ones who had laughed at her earlier now sat quietly. It wasn't because they suddenly became kind or thoughtful. It was because something in the music caught their attention without them even realizing it. Her hands were still a little shaky, but now each note carried more emotion, more warmth. She wasn't playing with perfect technique, but she was playing with sincerity. And sincerity has a way of reaching people even when they don't expect it. Her breathing grew more relaxed. She felt her shoulders loosen. She didn't notice, but her expression softened too, the tension in her eyes fading little by little. As she entered the next section of the piece, the music grew deeper. The melody lifted, then dipped, like the steady rise and fall of a quiet voice telling a heartfelt story. She had always loved this part because it reminded her of the evenings she spent practicing alone, when she felt unheard everywhere except at the piano. She let herself feel that again. The room felt less like a stage and more like the small, safe place she carried inside her heart. She leaned into the keys gently, her fingers dancing across them in a way that felt honest instead of forced. Someone in the front row blinked, surprised at how the music was shifting. They nudged their friend lightly, but instead of whispering something rude, they simply pointed toward her with a look of quiet respect. Her hands moved with more confidence as the notes climbed slowly into a brighter sound. It was the point in the piece where the sadness eased and hope began to show. When she practiced this part at home, she always imagined it like a window opening on a rainy day, letting a little sunlight in. Now, standing under the bright stage lights, she let that same feeling guide her. The melody lifted, and for the first time since she walked on stage, her heart didn't feel heavy. She didn't feel small or unwanted. She didn't feel like someone people laughed at. She felt like someone with a voice. The final note of the hopeful section lingered in the air, hanging for a heartbeat before she moved into the next part. This transition was always her favorite. It was gentle but strong. The moment the hall went silent, it felt like time had paused around her. She didn't know how it happened or when exactly the shift began, but she could feel the change in the room as clearly as she felt the piano keys under her fingers. A few minutes earlier, she had heard whispers, small laughs, and even the kind of mocking coughs people make when they want others to notice. But now, nothing. Not a sound. It was as if someone had gently pressed a mute button on the whole audience. She kept playing, letting the melody guide her instead of her nervous thoughts. She didn't dare lift her head. She didn't want to lose focus or break the fragile thread holding her steady. Her hands were moving as if they had a mind of their own. Each note seemed to rise gently, float through the air, and settle somewhere deep inside the people watching. The more she played, the more her confidence grew. She didn't try to show off, didn't try to make the performance dramatic. She simply played from the quiet place inside her where she kept her memories of the person who taught her to love music. Each time she touched the piano, she felt closer to those moments, and tonight was no different. The melody reached its softer part, and her fingers slowed, brushing the keys lightly. A wave of emotion passed through her chest. She didn't know if anyone in the audience could feel what she felt, but the silence told her that something had changed. They were no longer laughing. They were listening, truly listening. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw someone shift in their seat, but it wasn't a restless movement. It was the kind people make when something inside them stirs unexpectedly. A few rows back, arms that were crossed earlier gradually lowered. Someone leaned forward as if trying to catch every delicate note. Another person lifted their hand to their mouth, surprised by how moved they were. She kept going, letting the notes flow like a steady stream. Her breathing became calm. Her hands felt lighter. She forgot about the people who had mocked her earlier. She forgot about the fear that had almost made her leave the stage. All she knew was the music, and how it made her feel as if the whole room was wrapped in warmth. As she played the next part, the melody grew stronger, not loud or harsh, but full. It was the kind of sound that fills a space without overwhelming it, the kind that touches people before they even know what is happening. It was the part she always loved practicing at home, when no one was watching and she didn't have to worry about mistakes. One of the teachers standing near the side of the hall blinked quickly, trying to hide how surprised she was. She had seen many students perform over the years, but she hadn't expected this. Not from the girl who had walked on stage moments ago looking so unsure of herself. The teacher felt a small ache of guilt for assuming she would fail. A boy who had laughed earlier felt something twist inside his chest. He had made fun of her because others were doing it, and he didn't want to look different. Now he wished he hadn't. He stared at the stage, his smile fading, replaced with a strange feeling he didn't know how to name. A girl in the second row felt tears filling her eyes slowly. She wasn't crying because the music was sad. It wasn't. She was crying because the melody reminded her of a moment she thought she had forgotten, a moment with someone she missed deeply. She wiped her face quickly so no one would see, but the girl at the piano didn't notice any of this. She kept her head low, focusing on the keys. The music carried her through the hall, connecting her to people she didn't even know. It made her feel brave, strong, seen. When she reached the emotional middle section of the piece, her hands moved faster, but not out of fear. They moved with purpose. The tones grew richer, like colors blending into something beautiful. She still didn't know how the audience was reacting, but the energy in the room felt different from anything she had ever experienced. People weren't just quiet, they were drawn in, almost holding their breath. Her heart beat steadily, matching the rhythm she played. She didn't feel the weight of the audience's eyes anymore. She felt free, free from the doubt, the teasing, the uncomfortable stares she had received before stepping on stage. For once, all she cared about was the melody, and the melody carried her gently toward the next part. A soft gasp came from somewhere in the hall. Though she didn't lift her head to see who made it, she didn't need to. She could sense that the audience was beginning to feel the same emotion she felt all along. Music had a way of doing that, reaching places words never could. She had always believed that, even when others did in single quotes to dot. Her hands slowed again, allowing the piece to breathe. A warm light from the stage lamps fell softly across her fingers, casting shadows that moved with every note. She noticed it for a moment and smiled inside. It almost felt like someone was guiding her hands, helping her tell the story she couldn't put into words. She wondered if her grandmother would have been proud of her. The thought made her chest tighten, but not in a painful way. It was a warm feeling, one that made the music even more meaningful. She imagined her grandmother sitting in the front row, smiling softly the way she used to. She imagined her nodding in encouragement, urging her to keep going. If the audience could see the memories behind her performance, they would understand why she played with such heart. But even without knowing, they could feel it. The melody carried everything she held close: her hopes, her memories, and her quiet strength. As she approached the final rise of the piece, the emotion in the hall grew stronger. People who had walked in expecting to be entertained found themselves feeling something they hadn't felt in a long time. Some didn't even understand why a simple piano performance had touched them so deeply. All they knew was that the music had reached them in a way they didn't expect. Her fingers pressed firmly into the final sequence of chords. Each one felt like a heartbeat. The melody rose gently, filling the hall like a warm breeze before settling into a peaceful stillness. It was the moment where the audience finally understood that this was not just a performance. It was a story, a message, a quiet reminder that sometimes the people who are overlooked carry the most beautiful things inside them. The hall remained silent even after she played the last note. The sound faded slowly, as if reluctant to leave the room. She lifted her fingers from the keys and rested her hands on her lap. For the first time since she began playing, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. She still didn't know what the audience thought. She didn't know if they were impressed, confused, or still processing what they heard. But she felt calm, truly calm, and that was enough, at least for now. What she didn't know was that the silence in the hall wasn't empty. It was full of emotion, full of surprise, full of something no one had expected to feel when she first walked onto the stage. And in that quiet moment, something inside the audience began to shift, that same something that would soon turn into applause. She would never forget. The applause began like a soft ripple. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. She sat there on the piano bench, hands resting gently on her knees, breathing quietly. The hall was silent for a moment longer, as if everyone needed time to return from wherever her music had taken them. Then someone clapped, just once, then again, and suddenly the sound spread through the room like a rising wave. She didn't lift her head right away. She felt overwhelmed, unsure if the applause was truly for her. But the sound grew louder, stronger, filling the whole hall. She finally raised her eyes and saw the audience standing, not everyone at once, but in small groups, then more, until almost the entire hall was on their feet. People were smiling, some wiping their eyes. Others looked stunned, as if they couldn't believe that the quiet girl they had mocked earlier had created something so powerful. A few students who had whispered hurtful things before now looked almost embarrassed, their faces lowered in guilt. She blinked slowly, trying to understand. She had never seen so many people standing for her. She had never even imagined such a moment. For a long time, she had played only for herself, for comfort, for peace. She never played to be noticed. But now, she realized her music had reached these people in a way she never expected. A teacher near the front stepped forward and clapped with deep emotion. She looked proud, almost protective. The school principal stood as well, nodding in appreciation. Even the boy who had laughed at her earlier clapped hard, his face red, his expression soft and regretful. She finally stood up from the piano bench, feeling her legs slightly shaky. She bowed her head gently because she didn't know how else to show her gratitude. She didn't know the proper way to accept applause, and she didn't feel like she needed some perfect gesture. A simple bow felt right. When she looked up again, the audience was still clapping. She took a small step back from the piano, letting the moment sink in. She didn't smile widely or wave. She just stood with a calm expression, feeling the music still echoing inside her. After a while, the applause began to fade, but the warmth in the room didn't go away. People kept looking at her with admiration, with thankfulness, as if she had given them something meaningful. She never thought she could affect anyone that deeply. All she had done was play the way she always did, honestly, quietly, with emotion, and somehow, that was enough. She stepped off the stage slowly, holding her hands together. As soon as she walked into the hallway, she felt the air shift around her again. This time, it wasn't uncomfortable. Students gathered near the sides, whispering to each other, but their whispers sounded different now. They weren't mocking. They were curious, amazed, respectful. One girl approached her hesitantly. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "I didn't know you could play like that. I'm sorry for, earlier." The girl nodded, not knowing what to say. She appreciated the apology, but she didn't need to hold on to what had happened before. The music had healed her more than the words ever could. As she continued walking, a few more students stepped forward to speak with her. One boy said the performance made him think of his grandfather, who used to hum the same kind of melodies. Another student said she felt calm for the first time in weeks. Their words felt genuine, and she listened quietly, grateful for each one. Her teacher finally approached her with gentle steps. "You did wonderfully," she said with a warm smile. "I knew you had talent, but tonight you showed something beyond skill. You showed heart." The girl lowered her gaze shyly. "Thank you. I just played what I felt. And that," the teacher replied, "is what people remember." They walked together toward the back of the hall, where her mother stood waiting. Her mother's eyes were shining with pride, and as soon as the girl reached her, she wrapped her in a tight hug. "You were amazing," her mother whispered. "I wish you could see yourself the way everyone saw you tonight." The girl hugged her back, feeling safe and warm. "I was scared," she admitted, "but once I started playing, it felt like everything else disappeared." "That's because you were doing something true to who you are," her mother said. "Music has always been your language." Tonight, everyone finally heard it. They stayed in the hall for a while longer as people continued to approach them, offering kind words and encouragement. At some point, the principal came over, smiling warmly. "Your performance was one of the best we've ever seen at the school," he said. "I hope you continue to share your talent with others. The world needs more young people like you." The girl felt a deep warmth spread through her chest. She didn't feel nervous anymore. She didn't feel small or invisible. She felt seen, not because she had done something grand, but because she had played honestly. Later that evening, after the crowd faded and the hall became quiet, she returned to the empty stage. Her mother stood near the door, waiting patiently, while the girl walked slowly toward the piano again. She sat down on the bench and touched the keys gently, not to perform this time, but to feel the familiar comfort. The hall felt peaceful, still holding traces of the emotions from earlier. She played a soft melody, something she made up on the spot. It wasn't meant for anyone. It was just for her, a way to say goodbye to the moment that had changed her life. She realized something important as she played those quiet notes. Music had given her a voice, long before she understood it, and tonight, that voice had finally been heard. When she finished, she closed the piano lid softly and stood up. Her mother walked over and held her hand as they left the hall together. The night outside was cool, and the stars glimmered faintly above them. "Are you proud of yourself?" her mother asked gently. The girl thought for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Good, hold on to that feeling. You earned it." As they walked home under the quiet sky, the girl felt lighter than she had in a long time. She knew life wouldn't suddenly become perfect. People would still have opinions. There might be days when she doubted herself again, but something inside her had changed. She had stepped onto a stage filled with doubt and stepped off with courage. When they reached home, the girl touched the piano in her living room gently. She sat down and played just a few notes, not a full song, not a performance, just a small reminder that music would always be with her. And she smiled softly, knowing that no matter what happened next, she had already proven something to herself. Not that she was the best or that she needed to impress anyone, but that she had a voice, a gift, and the strength to share it. And sometimes, that was all anyone needed.